That's Norma's TV show with Norma Mulbranch, where facts of life are exposed. Debates include politics, education, mental health, religion, and social. That's Norma's TV show.
Chers amis de partout, salut, salut et bienvenue sur That's Norma's TV show qui paraît chaque samedi à pareille heure. Nous disons bienvenue sous choix et les amis, famille, share the show. Share the show because we have a nice show for you today. And for those who speak English, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're watching the show. And I would like to welcome you on the platform of Gospamac, on the platform of That's Norma's TV show. I mean, in the studio of Gospamac, and the platform of That's Norma's TV show. And it's always a pleasure for me to be here on this day at this time. And this is a day that I look forward to come to so I can speak to you and bring you certain information, whether it's medical, whether it's politics, whether it's about church. So we are here to help you out. On that note, you know that before we start the show, we always invite the Spirit of the Lord in the studio. Let's close our eyes together with me. Seigneur éternel, Dieu d'amour, Dieu de bonté, Dieu de grâce, Dieu de miséricorde. Nous pas gen bouche pour nous dire merci pour l'autre semaine que vous avez fait nous passer en bien. Nous disons merci pour la vie, nous disons merci d'être que tu prends soin de nous, nous disons merci pour Gospamac Studio et nous disons merci pour guests que nous gagnons aujourd'hui. We thank you, Lord. We thank you for everything that He has done. We thank you for life. We thank you for the week. We thank you for the breath. Thank you for my sister Shirley, who is my guest today, and with a nice topic. I prayed in Jesus' name. Amen. Encore une fois, bienvenue. And one more time, welcome, welcome, welcome. And we are happy to be in the studio in front of your TV, of your iPhone, of whatever that you are watching the show with. And do me a favor, call your friends and let them know that Norma's TV show is on the air. Bon, jusqu'avant nous prendre un break, n'a invité dans your end of the year celebration que Glory of El Shaddai qui a en tête le révérend Gardel Paul de 25 à 31 décembre dans 655 Parkside Avenue, Brooklyn. Vin fêter avec El Shaddai, vin louer avec El Shaddai, vin dire bon Dieu merci pour toute année ça, 365 jours. C'est pas une jouette que vous respiré toujours jusqu'à présent. Et tandis que c'est pas plus bon ou plus bon, il y a des gens qui déjà allé, qui déjà parti, il y a des gens qui l'hôpital, il y a des gens qui paralysé, il y a des gens qui perdu mémoire, qui pas même qu'à reconnaître famille. C'est ça que fait nous gain raison pour aller dans end of the year celebration ça que Glory of El Shaddai a organisé de 25 à 31 décembre. Nous encourageons pour aller tant pour chuter à la caillou ou bien temps pour aller dans un nightclub et puis al boire deux trois titafia et puis God forbid then you run into a car accident. No, I invite you and I advise you to go and celebrate the end of the year and to thank God because you are alive, your family is alive, your husband, your children, your mom, everyone is alive. And pas oublier que ta saison a commencé très bientôt et Dynasty Enterprises va faire nous connaître que année ça porte là toujours ouvri pour tout ancien client yo et pour tout nouveau client yo. Et n'appelez dans 929 433 84 24. Dynasty pas seulement fait taxe, mais nous gagnons typing services. Le fini nous fait documentation translation. Okay, so and many more. So nous encourageons Relay Dynasty Enterprises dans 929 433 84 24. N'a pris une pause et à tout de suite. We are back from watching Miss Karina Gantier-Fabien dans Délivrance. Est-ce qu'on croit que bon Dieu a levé ou, bon Dieu a délivré ou? Sous quoi ça, il est déjà fait, ou déjà délivré, ou déjà béni, soit ou cherché, ou déjà joigné. Et nous pas prêter davantage, nous pour rentrer tout droit pour nous présenter guest nous. Et guest nous pour aujourd'hui, c'est une nurse. Nous avons dit d'abord, c'est une sister. And she's a wife and she's a mother. And she's into nursing career. So it is with great pleasure that I am introducing to you Nurse Shirley Bellefleur Mathurin. Shirley.
Hi,
how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Okay, thank you so much
for
accepting my invitation. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And I know before you go into what of your topic, so why don't you tell our fan who you are? Who is Shirley?
Okay, hello everyone. First and foremost, I'm nervous, but I'm here by the grace of God, and I just want to thank Sister Norma for having me, and also commend her for the wonderful work she's been doing in the community for all these years. She is a blessing and a treasure, one of, I think, the best journalists in the Haitian community, so thank you for having me, Sister Norma. I am truly humbled. My name is Shirley Bellefleur Mathurin. I am a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for RN for over 15 years. And I can honestly say my interest in the nursing profession was really my mom, who encouraged me to study nursing, and she had enrolled me in the Clara Barton High School for Health Professions. And I actually started my nursing career as an adolescent when I was 15 years old, Clara Barton High School LPN program. And then from there, I continued my education. But my first major was community health education. I've always been very passionate about community health. And then I went on to get the BSN in nursing, and then later master's in nursing education. So all glory to God. It was not an easy road, but I had the good support of my parents, my parents were just instrumental in just encouraging me along the way, and family. So I'm grateful. Nothing is impossible with God.
Yes, you're right. Nothing is impossible with God. And I remembered a lot of people went to Clara Barton just for the nursing program that they have. That was really nice of that school.
Yes.
And people who knew about it, and they took advantage of it. But I don't know if Clara Barton still does that now.
They still do. They still do. They still have the nursing program. I checked
wow.
a month ago. It's still. So I'm grateful. It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's really it's a good segue into the health professions. And honestly, there are some people who, after LPN, because not everyone, has to go to college, needs to go to college, and they have, fruitful careers, make a living. So it's wonderful that after high school, if you choose not to further your education, you have a profession.
I think that was great. Right after graduating from Clara Barton,
Yes.
you are an LPN
17
and you can
years
start
old.
working. Yeah.
17 years old.
Wow.
Yes.
So I don't want anybody to tell me that États-Unis pas fait pour yo.
Amen. Amen.
Ok, États-Unis fait pour nous. L'école qui a une bonne éducation. Et ça, et Nurse Shirley t'a dit, Clara Barton, que je connais, most of you know that Clara Barton in Brooklyn. And at that time, I don't think it was in a good area. So, t'es un pile monde qui était peur aller là, just because c'est pas un bon area. Un pile famille haïtienne t'es peur, vous petit yo là, et qui permet que vous manquez une opportunité. Well, enough said. So, Miss Shirley venez avec une présentation pour nous, ok, sur hypertension and cardiovascular disease. Let me say it in English. Miss Shirley, she comes with a presentation on the topic of hypertension and cardiovascular disease. These are two great topics. Je connais un pile monde qui souffre avec hypertension qui lead to cardiovascular disease. I'm not a nurse. I'm going to let the nurse speak.
And you're right. You're not mistaken at all, Norma. Because
I know a little bit about medical stuff.
Yes. Actually, hypertension is classified as a type of cardiovascular disease, and we're going to go into our PowerPoint, I think, and so we'll go into more details. But you were right.
Okay, so let's watch carefully and let's listen carefully to what Nurse Shirley has to say to you today.
Okay, so I'll be all right. So we're gonna be okay. I'm sorry, pardon me. So, because I'm just seeing how to look at the slide and.
Okay, the slide is there.
Okay. So the disclaimer that I have is that this information is intended for informational purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose and/or treat disease. Please follow up with your healthcare provider, being a medical doctor, DO, doctor of osteopathic medicine, physician, assistant, or nurse practitioner. Hypertension is classified as a type of cardiovascular disease, also known as heart disease. Cardiovascular disease is classified as a group of blood and heart vessel disorders. For example, hypertension is a disease of the arteries. Varicose veins and chronic venous insufficiency is a disease of the veins. Hypertension is the persistent elevation of systemic arterial pressure. What is systemic arterial pressure? Systemic arterial pressure can also be referenced as blood pressure, the pressure measured within the large arteries during systemic circulation. What are the three main functions of the heart? The heart is about the size of our fist, and it sits behind the breastbone, left side. Not a lot of people think it's in the middle, but it's actually on the left side. So our heart is responsible for pumping blood, supplying oxygen and nutrients, and removing metabolic waste from all tissues of the body, such as carbon dioxide. Hypertension is the most common primary care diagnosis in the United States. I'm sure many of you know at least one or two people, 5, 10, 15, 20, who have been diagnosed with hypertension. Approximately 65% of Americans over the age of 60 have been diagnosed with hypertension. Less than 2/3 have blood pressure that is well controlled. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in the United States. It's also a misconception that hypertension only occurs in the elderly. Hypertension is not a disease of the elderly. Cardiovascular disease is the major cause of death in the United States. Nearly 800,000 people die in the United States each year from cardiovascular diseases. That's 1 in every 3 deaths. About 150,000 Americans who died from CVD in 2009 were younger than age 65. The prevalence of hypertension increases with age and is significantly higher for blacks than for whites. Hypertension, as defined by the 8th report of the Joint National Committee of Prevention and Detection and Evaluation and Treatment of High Blood Pressure, is a sustained pressure of 140 milligrams of mercury or greater, or diastolic pressure of 90 milligrams or higher. Normal blood pressure is associated with the lowest risk of cardiovascular complications. There are different types of hypertension. Primary hypertension, also known as idiopathic hypertension, has no known cause. It affects more than 90 to 95% of individuals. A combination of genetic and environmental factors have been linked with the development of primary hypertension. Genetic predisposition is thought to be polygenic. Polygenic involves multiple genes. I'm sure you probably hear people say, my mom, my dad, my aunt, we have hypertension. So yes, there is a genetic link. Risk factors associated with primary hypertension include family history, advancing age, gender, men younger than 55 and women older than 70, high dietary intake of sodium, glucose intolerance, heavy alcohol consumption, low dietary intake of potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And as I go more into the presentation, you'll understand how these minerals can improve your blood pressure. Secondary hypertension is caused by altered hemodynamics. It's associated with a primary disease, for example, renal disease or use of oral contraceptives, corticosteroids, or hormonal disorders of pregnancy. I'm sure maybe someone has known a pregnant woman who had preeclampsia issues during pregnancy that can cause a spike in your blood pressure. I always think it's good for us to always look at data when we're looking at disease. And this map is directly from the Centers for Disease Controls, and it shows concentrations of counties with the highest hypertension prevalence. And we see in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maine, and Michigan. And pockets of high-rate counties were also found in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. So as you can see throughout the United States, most of the states are impacted by hypertension. In 2017, the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association published new guidelines for hypertension management and defined hypertension as a blood pressure above 130/80. It's interesting to note, I would say maybe 5-10 years ago, 120/80 was considered the gold standard in blood pressure. However, if you're 120/80, it's almost an alert phase. Your healthcare providers are going to be watching you closely because it's considered that your blood pressure is elevated. You have not reached the diagnostic criteria for diagnosis of hypertension, but it's something to monitor. And then we have stage 1, 130 to 139 milligrams of mercury or more. And then you have stage 2 being over 140 systolic and over 90 at 90 and over 90 diastolic blood pressure. Having hypertension puts you at risk for heart disease and stroke, which is the leading cause of death in the United States. In 2020, more than 670 deaths in the United States had hypertension as a primary or contributing cause. Nearly half of the adults in the United States, 47% or 160 million, have been diagnosed with hypertension as defined as a systolic blood pressure over 130 and diastolic over 80 and are taking medication. Only about 1 in 4 adults with hypertension have their condition under control. About half of adults, 45% with uncontrolled hypertension, have a blood pressure over 140 over 90 or higher. This includes 37 million adults. About 34 million adults who have been recommended to take medication may need to have medication prescribed. Almost 2/3 of this group have a blood pressure of 140/90. High blood pressure costs the United States about $130 billion each year, averaged over 12 years between 2003 and 2014.
Wow. Wow. That's really a lot. Let's take a break from this, then we can continue. But I have a couple of questions
Sure.
on the hypertension. From listening to what you're saying, there are two types of hypertension. So between the two types of hypertension, which one is the most dangerous?
I would say, you know what? It's a tough
Or
question.
hypertension is hypertension?
No, it's not. It's a good question because with hypertension, with primary hypertension, it depends on how well it's managed and being controlled. I think either between primary and secondary hypertension, if it's not well controlled, it can lead to malignant hypertension, which can lead to stroke and sometimes death. So the key is to have it controlled because, say, for example, I revert to pregnant woman. If her blood pressure is not controlled and she's pregnant, she's become preeclamptic, she could die, right, from that blood pressure not being controlled. If we have a patient who has secondary hypertension, secondary to renal failure, and that blood pressure is not controlled, that person can also have a severe stroke. So it really depends on controlling the blood pressure and treating the underlying cause with, medication if prescribed, close monitoring, because either one can have an untoward outcome.
Okay, so let's say a pregnant woman has an uncontrolled blood pressure. So wouldn't that, I know you said that she can have preeclampsia.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that have an effect or affect on the baby, on the fetus?
Yeah, well, that's why usually when women are like in that preeclamptic state, they're hospitalized, they're kept under close supervision and medication. The goal is to keep them from having eclampsia because then they start to seize and it can be life-threatening. So usually in those cases, if the mom is severely preeclampic, it's going to impact the fetus. They may have an emergency delivery to save the mother and to also protect the child because it's almost as if the I don't want to say the pregnancy caused it, but it's a contributing factor. So you want to mitigate the underlying cause. And of course, the initial goal in medicine is always to save the mother first and then the baby, unfortunately.
Wow. I also, now the question is that on the elderly who suffered with hypertension, how their lives are in danger?
Well, with the elderly, I would say the major issue is if the blood pressure is not being monitored, if they're not being, the blood pressure is not being monitored, they're not following up with their healthcare provider, they're not following up with specialists. That's wherein the complication lies. However, if you have an elderly patient who is, compliant with his or her medical regimen and they're following up, the risk of complication lessens. However, he or she has to follow recommendations in terms of diet, adhering to medication. It doesn't mean because sometimes we have patients who do everything and then they still have an event. But if you are really following with your healthcare provider, your medical regimen as prescribed, it decreases the likelihood. It doesn't mean it won't happen, but it will significantly decrease the likelihood.
I know you understand Creole a little bit.
A lot, enough.
A lot, because I just heard you speaking with your dad. Pour moun ki gen ti moun qui souffri, on connaît gen ti moun tout parce que c'est pas adulte ou bien grand monde qui souffre avec hypertension.
No.
Ti moun tout.
Yes.
So grand monde, adult or whatever age, other age besides kids, you buy you médicaments pour contrôler hypertension. So si moun yo, bébé yo pas ka swallow pills. So c'est une forme, est-ce que yo mettez un médicament sous forme liquid?
Okay, that's a very good question. Hypertension in the pediatric population, it's it's definitely, there are children diagnosed with hypertension. Sometimes children are diagnosed with hypertension secondary. What usually with children, it's secondary hypertension. Like I've cared for patients who have had cancer, and as a result of the cancer, post chemotherapy, they have hypertension and they actually have to be on hypertensive meds. Usually it depends on the pharmacokinetics. There are some medications that can be crushed and administered to that child. You know, most, if it's, well, you'd be surprised, I've worked in NICU as well, even infants can have hypertension. Wow. Pulmonary hypertension. So yes, that medication is available, usually in IV form, intravenously, if you're treating a child with hypertension. Okay. But in terms of follow-up management in the home for continued hypertensive medications, like I said, it's usually associated with secondary hypertension. Mm-hmm. And with children who have primary hypertension, I'm seeing children who are obese secondary to genetic factors, environmental factors. Healthcare providers really try to monitor those children closely, recommend behavior modification. Usually medication is the last resort unless that blood pressure is not controlled. However, I would say in most instances, children with secondary hypertension, renal issues, they have to be on medication. But if the primary hypertension is attributed to lifestyle or environmental factors, in terms of they may live in an environment where they don't have access to fresh food, right? It might be easier for mom to go to McDonald's for dinner every night. It might be easier to buy Chef Boyardee, or some parents, it's not that they don't love their kids, they want to make their kids happy, they give them junk food. So I think from that vantage point, if a healthcare provider is looking at a child who's presenting with obesity, they could be pre-diabetic, they usually try lifestyle changes prior to implementing medication. However, if that child reaches that threshold from pre-diabetes to diabetes, he or she's going to need insulin. If the blood pressure is out of control, they're going to start them on medication.
Je vais demander en créole et puis répondre en anglais. Vous avez parlé de obésité avec génétique. Génétique, c'est le monde prend une maladie parce que il est dans la famille. Et moi, je connais des gens qui souffrent avec hypertension, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. Pas grand monde dans la famille qui gagne. Mais si moun ça gros, m'a essayer bien comprendre pour m'expliquer moun yo. Mais si moun ça dépasse une grosseur que le pas supposé y, so li kas vin souffrir plus tard avec hypertension, parce que me connais grand pile bagay l'on manger qui monte et qui vient fort souffrir avec blood pressure. Tant qu'on fritaille. Yes. OK? Et en plus l'autre bagage, il y a plus de monde qui pas manger healthy. Yes, absolutely. Il y a plus de monde qui pas manger vegetable. Qui aime manger viande cochon yo, ti yo. So bagay ça, tout bagay ça yo ka monter, vient faire moun nan souffrir avec tension, sucre et vient même barreau cardiovascular disease.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hypertension, unfortunately, is a disease of the arteries, but it is a segue to cardiovascular disease. So yes, I don't want to say obesity is hereditary. I know there are some families where people tend to have a higher BMI, but behavior modification can change that, because you can be
genetic.
Yeah, I know.
Si maman papa fat, yeah. So definitively so fat.
However, I knew someone. It's yes and no, who came from a family. Mom was obese, dad was obese, and as she grew into her adolescence, she became obese as well. However, she made major changes in terms of diet and lifestyle.
Exercise.
Now she's distant. Yeah. So you may not be a size 6 or a size 2, But even with hereditary, you can make changes. You don't necessarily have to be obese because mom and dad were, or even though there's a genetic predisposition, lifestyle modification can be very impactful in improving your quality of life.
Unfortunately, time is always short for That's Norma's TV show. We bring good topics, but we never can finish up the topics the way I would want to bring it out to the community. And I'm looking at the board right now. We only have 19 minutes. I'm not even going into commercial break because I really want you to touch the cardiovascular disease. Parce que on connaît que hypertension lead to cardiovascular disease et gain des fois les bouchées artériaux qui viennent cause qu'on faut aller mettre some type of, I think, stent.
Yeah, cardiac stent.
Okay, in your heart. And I know
and hypertension is a cardiovascular disease. It is, once you're diagnosed with hypertension, you have a cardiovascular disease. So it's
once you diagnose with hypertension, so you have cardiovascular disease?
Yes, it's a type of cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Wow, so let's talk about cardiovascular disease.
Yep. As we go into the PowerPoints, we could delve into that a little bit more. That's what I'm saying. With cardiovascular disease, it's like a group of diseases that affect the arteries and the veins. And there's so many different types of cardiovascular disease. For some people, they don't have hypertension, they have issues with circulation, they have venous issues, but that's also a type of cardiovascular disease. The issue with hypertension is because, like, your heart is like, it's a muscle, right? It's like a fist, and your heart, when you're hypertensive, when your heart is at rest, because there are different phases, it's like your heart is really never resting, and our heart is broken up into 4 chambers. The left ventricle is responsible for like the systemic pressure that's going throughout the body. And if you look at an echocardiogram of a patient with hypertension, you're going to see that left ventricle, most of the time it's something that's called left ventricular hypertrophy, where it's enlarged because it's working so hard to pump that blood. And another issue with hypertension too, you'll see patients with uncontrolled hypertension, they can have a heart attack, stroke, kidney failure. They can actually go into kidney failure because all of these small blood vessels now are impacted. Because what we don't realize, our heart works so hard to pump that blood, and which is why obesity is another risk factor, because when you're obese, your heart has to work that much harder to get blood, oxygen, and nutrients out. So once you're diagnosed with hypertension, you have cardiovascular disease. It's not like a separate entity. It just falls under a type of cardiovascular disease.
Wow. So someone with hypertension, if they don't take their meds, so what would happen to that person? Because let me tell you, Sister Shirley, Nurse Shirley, there are a lot of people that I know. That's why it's always important to me to bring out medical issues and medical topics, because I speak with a lot of people. And unfortunately, there are some of them who cannot afford to buy the meds or who don't have health insurance. And they stay without meds, and some of them don't even go to the doctors. So they can go to the emergency room, and then they were diagnosed right there, hypertension, blah, 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 and to follow up with your medical doctor, which you don't have. So, and the person is still living. So what happened if the person keep doing that, don't take their meds? What would you advise them?
Okay, Sister Norma, you bring up an important point. It's something that's happening a lot in our community, especially in communities of color, where we have issues with demographics, access to health care. Those patients are at higher risk. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is such a high rate of death from cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and stroke, secondary to lack of access to care, patients' inability to pay for medication, failure to adhere to dietary modifications. The hypertensive patient who does not take medications, unfortunately, is at great risk of heart attack, stroke, and end organ failure. That's just it's sad to say. What I would recommend for a patient, say if you don't have access to health care, if you're not able to afford your blood pressure medication, or some people just don't like to take medication.
Yes.
They might say, okay, I'm going to skip one day, I'm not going to take. I would advise you to really watch your diet, eliminate sodium, because sodium impacts blood pressure. It actually raises the blood pressure. Eat healthy fruits and vegetables. Incorporate exercise as much as you can. And I always say, before you start any exercise regimen, please reach out to your healthcare provider, because not everyone can jump on a treadmill. Okay, not everyone, can afford to go to a gym. Walking 30 minutes 5 days a week can significantly impact your life. Brisk walking. If you're not able to walk briskly, you can take your time. We're going to run into the PowerPoint. So for evaluation and treatment, a single elevated blood pressure reading does not constitute a diagnosis of hypertension. Diagnosis requires at least 2 or 3 readings of elevated high blood pressure, at least 5 minutes apart. So you shouldn't take your blood pressure after running or walking, or after smoking or drinking coffee. The American Heart Association also recommends 24-hour ambulatory blood pressure monitoring for select individuals. Some patients, if their insurance will cover it, can go home with this monitor, and the healthcare provider will get the readings of your blood pressure. And then, too, it can rule out what they call white coat syndrome. Some patients, simply because they go to the doctor, raises their blood pressure.
Yes.
So if this is but I said, it depends if the insurance will cover it. That's another story. Okay, so what are the complications of uncontrolled hypertension? It's a perfect segue to Norma. So high blood pressure can damage your arteries by making them less elastic, decreases the blood flow and oxygen to your heart, and leads to heart disease. In addition, decreased blood flow to the heart can cause chest pain, also called angina. Heart attack happens when the blood supply to your heart is blocked and heart muscle begins to die without enough oxygen. The longer the blood flow is blocked, the greater the damage to the heart. Heart failure means your heart cannot pump enough blood and oxygen to your other organs. High blood pressure can cause the arteries that supply blood oxygen to the brain to burst or be blocked, causing a stroke. Brain cells die during a stroke because they don't have enough oxygen. Stroke can cause serious disabilities in speech, movement, and other basic activities. And we all know, sadly, stroke can kill you. Having high blood pressure, especially in midlife, is linked to poor cognitive function and dementia later in life. And so you want to also, adults with diabetes and high blood pressure have a higher risk of developing kidney disease than those without those conditions.
Wow.
So, prevention and management, getting at least 115 minutes of physical activity each week, about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And I encourage you to please do not start an exercise regimen without consulting with your healthcare provider. Not smoking, try a smoking cessation program, eating a healthy diet, limiting sodium and alcohol, managing stress. Stress contributes to hypertension. In addition to making positive lifestyle changes, some people with high blood pressure need to take medication to manage their blood pressure. Talk with your healthcare doctor right away if you've had high blood pressure, or if you've been told that your your blood pressure is not under control. By taking action to lower your blood pressure, you can protect yourself against heart disease and stroke. So the thing is that the segue is that the hypertension will lead to heart disease and stroke, but it falls under the same family. Okay, so I mentioned nutrition, potassium. Normal body levels of potassium are important for muscle function, including relaxing the walls of the blood vessels. This lowers blood pressure and protects against muscle cramping. So it's good to incorporate potassium in your diet. However, do this under the discretion of your healthcare provider. What if the last time you had blood work, you were hyperkalemic, your potassium was high? Your healthcare provider may recommend you have a low potassium diet. That's why I reiterated that this is not to be, taken without consultation with your healthcare provider. Magnesium too can help regulate hundreds of body systems, including blood pressure, blood sugar, and muscle and nerve function. So in increasing your dietary intake of potassium and magnesium can also help regulate blood pressure.
Wow.
Calcium, you want me to go?
Huh?
Calcium,
Calcium?
Yes, calcium too. Calcium is important for healthy blood pressure because it helps blood vessels tighten and relax when they need to. Okay, it's also crucial for healthy bones and in the release of hormones and enzymes we need for most body functions. And we get this in dairy products, fish, canned salmon, and sardines. But I would recommend you read your labels because sometimes the canned salmon has too much sodium. So it's actually fresher if you can afford it to have fresh salmon. Dark green leafy vegetables. So we have some foods here, okay, that are high in potassium. We have apples, cucumbers, coconut water, pomegranate, bananas, potatoes, avocados. But as I mentioned, please consult with your healthcare provider. Not everyone can be on a high potassium diet, especially patients with renal failure.
Okay.
You have to be careful.
All right. So these were vitamins for someone with hypertension. But let's say if the person also is diabetes, so can that person take any of these
Good
vitamins?
question.
It would not affect them?
Well, very good question. With your diabetes, you have to monitor your carbohydrate intake. And with diabetes too, you want to ensure that you consume like whole grains, whole grain bread, oatmeal, foods with a low glycemic index that's not going to raise your blood sugar. The good thing about fruits have fiber, and the more fiber foods that are generally high in fiber have a good impact on the blood sugar. Whereas if you eat
any foods, or they can eat any foods, because I know
in
oranges,
moderation. But it's not because you're diabetic you cannot have fruit. We want you to eat fruit, but in moderation, because if you don't want to have like 4 cups of grapes, right? You can do like a quarter cup of grapes. You can have a banana. The key is to eat foods that are high in fiber, that have that low glycemic index, because our patients with diabetes too need to have good nutrition. It's not that you can't have carbs, but you want to have complex carbs, high fiber foods that are not going to cause that spike in your blood sugar.
Okay, all right. So, Miss Shirley, what can you tell in 7 minutes and 9 seconds? So, I would like you to I know it's important to have vitamins. So it's also important to have vegetables. So what can you, I know you were about to talk about vegetable. So maybe within 6 minutes, what can you say about the vegetable?
Okay, what I can say about vegetables are great. Vegetables are low in carbs, high in vitamins and minerals. I would encourage you, eat not canned vegetables, fresh vegetables. Frozen vegetables are good too. You can have frozen vegetables, fresh vegetables. Avoid fried foods, foods that are high in sodium, high in salt. If you need to have that crisp, you can bake. Bake is an alternative. I would recommend that you remove the skin, so it's more healthy, because we know that's where
you mean the skin of the chicken.
The skin of the chicken, yes. I know that's our favorite part. That's my favorite part too.
No, I don't eat that.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Okay. But for some people, I say change is difficult, but I would encourage you to please follow up with your healthcare provider. See your doctor, MD, PA, nurse practitioner. try to adhere to whatever dietary recommendations that they give you. Don't share medications with someone else who has high blood pressure, because
That's
that patient may be prescribed a calcium channel blocker and your doctor wants you to be on a diuretic. Okay, so imagine the impact that will have when you never share medications. If your doctor gives you a referral, please follow up with a referral. Actually, it's recommended that all patients who are diagnosed with hypertension be evaluated by a cardiologist.
I'm glad you mentioned that about sharing medication. A lot of Haitian people like to share medication.
Yeah.
Let's say if someone has high blood pressure and she's taking losartan, so that person shared the losartan with somebody else, thinking that, hey,
She's
if
helping.
I can take it and it lower my blood pressure, so it can do it for her too.
Nope.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because they
Yeah.
have the habit of doing that. Or if even with the metformin,
Yes.
okay, and this is crazy, and I don't think they think that it could be good for that one,
Yes.
but not good for you, and then it could cause something else inside you.
Exactly. And you also want to monitor your blood pressure too. Remember, the thing about hypertension is known as a silent killer, because most patients with hypertension don't have any symptoms. The only way you know is if you take your blood pressure. So I would suggest you invest, if you're able to, in a blood pressure monitor that's approved by your pharmacist or your physician. Check your blood pressure at least 3 times a week. Keep a log of what your blood pressure is. Now, there are some patients I know who are hypertensive who say when their blood pressure is high, they feel it. They said, I feel it in my neck. I get a really
headache.
bad headache. Some patients say that, and I'm not disputing it, but for the most part, most patients with hypertension don't have symptoms. And usually, hypertension...
Is that so?
Yes, it's asymptomatic. That's why they call it the silent killer. So you could have hypertension for years, and then it's wreaking havoc on your blood vessels, and by the time they realize that there's something wrong, you could be in kidney failure and no one knew you were high blood pressure because you were maybe that patient who never went to the doctor. So that's why it's so important to follow up with your healthcare provider at least once a year. Have a physical, have the blood work done. Don't make any dietary changes without consulting with your healthcare provider, because you need to know what your levels are before you make changes, okay? What may be healthy for me, for Norma, may not be good for you. So always keep that in mind. And also with supplements, be careful with supplements too, because there's so much information now. Sometimes the supplements that you take, you think may be helping you, can actually diminish the effects of the prescription medication that you're taking. Even teas that we drink.
When you said supplements, are you referring to, because I want to be clear for them, are you referring to pills?
Yes.
Or drinks? Because you know there
It
are
could be a
people who
drink.
take the Ensure.
It could be a drink. Usually with the prescribed dietary supplements such as glucerna, Ensure, no. I'm talking about the things that they're selling over the counter.
Over the counter.
You know, some people in turmeric, ginkgo biloba. There's so many different supplements, and I'm not saying that they're not good, but please consult with your healthcare provider, because it can actually make some of the prescription medications that you're taking less effective. And sometimes it can even become toxic if you mix certain herbs with prescription medication. That's why you have to be very careful with the supplements that you take. Discuss it with your healthcare provider, because there may be harmful drug interactions.
There's a lot to say. You mentioned something about toxic.
Yeah.
And many people is not gonna detox themselves,
Yeah.
and all these toxins, you know, stick inside of you and make you worse. Wow, that's a lot of information, and unfortunately, time is running. 1 minute left. I hope you understand. Moi, souhaiter que nous comprenions, et ça, M. Shirley t'a expliqué de moun qui souffre attention, comment attention et vin tourner dans bon problème cœur et problème dans artère, et ou pas vrai gagner problème ça. Ok, bon, maestro dit me consacrer 5 minutes encore, m'a bay Shirley s'il gon bagay li vle ajouter, ok, pour l'ajouter pour peuple ka connaît et sous ça l'a dit.
Okay.
Alors bah de s'ouvrir pas de 5 minutes à médicament ou bien à comment pour moun yo prendre soin de tête yo, ça pour manger, ça pour yo pas manger. Moi compte moun k'ap manger canned food.
Yeah.
Parce que yo dit canned food là les cause cancer.
Yes.
Vous comprenez?
Yes.
So moi même les manger un bagay frais.
Yeah.
Même frozen là. Si m'a pas acheté feuille là, tant que kale et spinach, bah ça est bon pour la santé.
Yes.
So reste là dans mon.
Yes, and I'm so happy as I think it's a good way to wrap up with nutrition. I don't know if you know, Sinema, I think it was Mayor Adams, the mayor of New York City. He was very, very open about his struggle with diabetes, with the diet that he had prior to making a change. And I'm not saying that everyone should go plant-based. However, he changed his diet and he reversed everything. Diet.
No more diabetes.
He is no longer diabetic.
Wow.
Okay, and he said that his diabetes was so high, it was gotten to the point where he was having difficulty with vision. His doctors told him that he was probably going to be on dialysis within a few months.
Or even blind.
Yes, his labs were completely out of whack. I'm not saying everyone should go plant-based. However, incorporating a plant-based diet, beans, green vegetables, can significantly reverse the course of these chronic illnesses.
So, ou moun kap soufri diabetes pour longtemps, et puis ou changer diet totalement, plant-based, and then you can reverse it. I always read that it can be reversed though.
Yeah, I want to say that with caution, because their diabetes is so out of control with their insulin regimen, it may not be able to be fully reversed. However, the risk of having those complications significantly decreases.
I was not referring to those who are insulin, because I know once you are insulin, so I'm not saying that's it for you, you get a break, but I don't think with insulin it could be reversed also.
For some patients, yes. Some patients, yes, there's very, very few, and I can tell you, the endocrinologists, they discontinue insulin with lots of caution and precautions, because they're always concerned, because, sometimes patients start, and then when they improve, they revert back. So sometimes what they may do is start to titrate, give you a lower dose, see how you're doing, but because it can be risky to automatically just discontinue your insulin because your hemoglobin A1C went down. It's really done with a lot of caution because of the risk of complications.
So once you're talking about A1C right now, what's the normal A1C a person can have?
Well, anything 6.5 and above is diabetes.
6.5
and up.
Okay.
And some labs say 6.2. It really depends on the lab, but once you're like over 6.2 or up, you've crossed the threshold of diabetes.
Okay. This is why I always think that l'on moun al kay docteur, faut poser question.
Absolutely.
Parce que gen pile moun kay docteur, docteur dit prends ça, yo pas poser question. Parce que faut connaître qui side effects que li gagne, ou pas vle prendre commencer prendre un bagage et puis pour discontinuer, parce que le gen des médicaments même le yo mette side effects yo, gen moun qui pas même li yo. So sou pas gen temps pour l'île, préférable que ou poser docteur question. C'est pas juste pour prendre médicament ou bien ça docteur a dit, on dit docteur a dit oh OK, ou gen cancer qui côté. OK, et comment fait-elle bagaille? Qui me dit qui vont pour lui? Vous comprenez ça m'a dit? So est-ce que moun yo qui pour le docteur yo pas supposé poser question pour dire que pour docteur expliquer yo? Parce que tant qu'on insuline gen moun docteur a dit pas jamais sortir dans insuline. Il pas ka sortir dans insuline. Vous comprenez? Ou bien gen moun qui dit bon pas jamais ka sortir dans metformin ou bien whatever medication that they are taking. So,
It
faut poser
depends.
question.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because every situation, every case is patient specific. Sometimes healthcare providers are well intentioned, but they sometimes tend to make broad generalizations based on evidence based practice, based on literature. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but just because you're on metformin now doesn't mean you're going to be on metformin for the rest of your life. You can do things, and it's funny because Eric Adams said that there was never a physician who spoke to him about lifestyle, who spoke to him about exercise and spoke to him about nutrition. They were just focused on managing his illness. So when he took control in injections, when he took control and made those changes, he's living a very healthy life now. He's not on any meds. And I don't want to say this to say if you do this, you will not be on any medications, because some individuals, in spite of dietary modifications and changes, they may still have an elevated blood pressure. It could be secondary hypertension. However, you may be able to reduce the amount of meds that you're on. You may reduce the likelihood of ever having a stroke or a heart attack. So that's why I'm saying that's why you have to work closely with your healthcare provider and just be proactive in managing your health. Do research too. Do research. And when I say research, don't just Google. Make sure you get your information from reputable sources.
Yes.
And if you're like such as Centers for Disease Control, I know the CDC gets a bad rep. But then, we have other reputable, we have the American Heart Association as well. So, yeah, thank you.
My time is up.
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry to cut you
That's
off.
okay. Thank you.
Yes, but it's a very interesting topic. Again, Nurse Shirley, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
And the topic was very interesting.
Very.
I appreciate your knowledge, and may God continue to bless you.
May God bless you too. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Thank you for having me. And, health is wealth. The Bible says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And what I've come to the realization, sometimes even with all of the bad things that we do to our bodies, when you start to change, the body is able to recover and adapt. So I think we should just, and as Sister Norma and I were talking about earlier, the Bible says our people perish because of lack of knowledge. So don't let lack of knowledge, result in you perishing or not living your best quality of life. And then, some people survive, CVAs, and then their quality of life is impacted. So
you're gonna have to come back.
On that note,
we're pretty good.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And ou même qui t'a suivre That's Norma TV Show, nous disons merci d'être été jusqu'à la dernière minute et nous souhaitons que vous ayez apprécié et topic ça aujourd'hui qui hypertension and cardiovascular disease. OK, et comment il est important pour prendre médicaments, pour suivre diet tout, et pas cher et médicaments avec l'autre monde. OK, et puis manger bien, manger feuilles, pas chita manger griot ou fritaille.
Banane free,
OK, banane free. So prends soin de tête tout parce que tu as aimé vivre plus pour qu'avoir petit ou grandi ou bien petit tout. OK? So, jusqu'à ce que nous rencontrions samedi prochain, c'était Norma Malbranche pour That's Norma's TV Show. I love you guys. Again, thank you. See you.
Jésus c'est moi mon pardon. Adore bon Dieu. Yahweh c'est moi mon pardon. Loué pour ça le fait dans la vie. Jésus c'est moi mon pardon. Hey, tout côté au passé. Yahweh c'est moi mon pardon. Témoigner.
That's Norma's TV show with Norma Mulbranch, where facts of life are exposed. Debates include politics, education, mental health, religion, and social